Most men who get taken don't find out through a dramatic confrontation. There's no moment where the woman breaks down and confesses. No angry phone call. No mutual friend with a conscience. Most men find out the small way. A screen left unlocked for 30 seconds too long. A notification that pings when nobody was supposed to be watching. Preston Norwood found out on a beach towel in Davao. He found out that he had a nickname, a budget line, and a projected graduation date. And the thing that broke him, the thing he still can't fully explain to his brother in Sacramento, wasn't the betrayal. It was the column labeled graduation, and what it meant, and the fact that some part of him had always known something was off, and had chosen not to look. This is what it costs a man to prefer being a project over being alone. The phone was face up on the beach towel, and Aiza had gone to get water from the cooler about 20 meters away, and the group chat notification came in, and I looked at it the way you look at a phone that isn't yours when it lights up next to you, not intending to read it, just registering that it lit up, the way a light changes in a room. The preview was enough. How's the project? 3 laughing emojis, then a second message below it, partially visible. Check the sheet. She updated the. I picked up the phone. I'm going to be honest about that. I made a deliberate choice to pick it up, which means I made a deliberate choice to know, and I want to own that, because everything that followed came from that choice, and I don't want to present myself as a passive receiver of information that arrived without my participation. I found the spreadsheet in the message thread. It was a shared Google sheet, linked in the chat. I opened it. There were columns. Headers in a mix of English, and what I later understood was Bisaya, the regional language of Davao. My name wasn't in it. I was labeled P throughout, which I assumed stood for project. The columns tracked amounts. Phone upgrade, already completed, $480 against a projected $500. Nursing review class fees, in progress, $3,200 against a projected $3,500. Canada visa application, not yet started, projected $8,000 to $12,000 depending on pathway. Family roof, completed, $14,000 against a projected $15,000. Car, completed, $22,000. There was a column at the far right. It was labeled graduation at the top. Below it, a projected date. 8 months from the month we were currently in. I sat on that beach towel and looked at the screen, and the Gulf of Davao was doing what it always does, being flat and blue and indifferent, and Aiza was at the cooler with her back to me, and I understood, in the specific, clinical way that you understand something when all the information arrives at once and there is no longer any room for the comfortable alternative, exactly what the last 22 months of my life had been. Let me go back to how it started. I need to go back because the beginning is important to the story, and also because I want to be fair to myself, which is harder than it sounds when you're the one who made the choices. I retired from dentistry at 65. 38 years in practice in Sacramento, the last 22 in my own office on Folsom Boulevard, with 3 chairs and a hygienist named Donna, who had been with me since 1998 and who cried when I sold the practice, which was one of the more genuinely moving things that happened to me in the last year of my professional life. I had built something real and steady and useful over those 38 years, and I was proud of it, in the straightforward way that a man is proud of work that helped people and paid for itself and lasted. My marriage to Linda ended in 2014. Not badly, but finally, after 26 years that had been good in parts and exhausting in parts, and complicated in most of the ways long marriages become complicated. We had 2 daughters, Jenna, who was 40 and lived in Portland with her family, and Rachel, who was 36 and had relocated to Seattle for work. Linda and I were amicable in the specific way of people who have agreed to be amicable and mean it, which is different from genuine ease but is also not nothing. I had friends in Sacramento. I had a house in Curtis Park that I'd bought in the 90s, and that had appreciated to a value that made retirement financially comfortable. I had time, finally, and good health, and the specific disorientation that comes with time and good health when you're 65 and have spent every working day for 38 years in a scheduled, purposeful context, and suddenly the schedule is gone, and the purpose is negotiable. I went to the Philippines because my college friend Marcus had retired there 2 years before me, and talked about it with an enthusiasm that I found slightly excessive, until I went and found it was mostly accurate. Marcus lived in Cebu, and was happy in the loose, expanded way of a man who has found more room for himself than his previous life had given him. He took me around for 2 weeks, showed me the islands and the diving and the food, and the life you could live on a Sacramento dentist's savings if you applied them to Cebuano prices. And by the end of the 2 weeks I understood why he'd stayed. I came back to Sacramento, sorted what needed sorting, and returned to the Philippines 3 months later. This time I went further south. Marcus knew a man in Davao who ran a small diving operation, and Davao had a reputation as one of the safer, quieter cities in the country, and I'm a man who prefers quiet. I rented a furnished apartment in a residential area near the bay, signed a 6-month lease, and told myself I was trying it for a semester, the way a cautious man tries anything. I met Aiza in the 4th week. The cafe was near my apartment, a small place with good air conditioning and decent espresso, and a covered outdoor section where I'd taken to spending my mornings with a book. She worked the morning shift. She was efficient at it, and not performatively warm. She made coffee well, and remembered orders without writing them down, and managed the morning rush with the competent quietness of someone who had been doing something long enough to stop thinking about it consciously. I started going every morning. That's on me, and I know it. And I knew it at the time in a mild, self-aware way. I was a 67-year-old widower of retirement in a foreign city, and a 23-year-old who was good at her job and made decent espresso was the anchor of my mornings. That's not predatory, it's human, and I'm not going to perform shame about noticing that she existed. What I am going to be honest about is what happened next. She started talking to me in the quiet periods. Not flirtatiously, she wasn't performing anything. That's what I want to say. She talked to me the way a young person talks to an older man, when they're genuinely curious about something that man represents, which in this case was America, and dentistry, and what a life looked like from the other side of 60. She asked real questions. She had a notebook she kept under the counter, and she told me she was studying for the nursing board exam in the mornings before her shift. And she showed me the notebook once, the margins covered in dense handwriting, that was clearly real study rather than a prop. I found that admirable. I still find it admirable, even now, because the nursing exam studying was real. She was actually doing it, actually trying to build something for herself, and that was true regardless of what else was also true. We had coffee together on her day off in week 6. She told me about Davao, about growing up in a barangay on the southern edge of the city, where her parents ran a small variety store that barely covered the bills, about her younger brother, who was good at mathematics and deserved better schooling than the family could manage. She wasn't performing poverty. She wasn't making me feel the weight of it as a prelude to anything. She was just describing her life, the way people describe their lives when they're comfortable enough to be honest. I told her about Sacramento, about the practice, about Linda and the girls, and the Curtis Park house, and the specific quality of the Central Valley in October, when the heat breaks and the mornings smell like something other than summer. She listened with the genuine attention of someone to whom all of it was genuinely new, and listening with genuine attention is one of the rarest things one person can offer another, and I was susceptible to it in the specific way of a man who had spent a year being nobody in particular since the practice sold. We spent more time together through the following months. I want to describe this accurately, rather than euphemistically. We were in a relationship by month 3, though neither of us had formally named it, in the way that things become what they are before they're named. She was 23, and I was 67, and I was not confused about the arithmetic. I knew what the numbers were. What I told myself, what I genuinely believed, and what I still think is at least partially true, is that the connection between us was real, within whatever framework the connection was happening in. The word I used to my brother Victor was mentoring. He's 63 and lives in Sacramento still, and we talk every Sunday, and I told him about Aiza 3 months in the careful language of a man who knows his brother is going to have a reaction, and is trying to preempt the worst of it. I said I was mentoring her. I said I was helping her with her nursing exam preparation, covering the review class fees, giving her a real chance at a career that her circumstances wouldn't have allowed otherwise. Victor said, "Preston, how old is she?" I said 23. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I'm not going to lecture you. Just, eyes open." I said eyes open. I believed that. I genuinely believed I had my eyes open. The nursing review classes were the first significant cost. The program she wanted was a reputable one. She showed me the prospectus. I looked up the institution. It checked out. And the fees were $3,200 for the full course. I paid them without extended discussion. She was going to take an exam that could change her career trajectory. And the fee was real. And I had the money. And it seemed like exactly the kind of thing a man with means could do for a younger person. That was straightforwardly useful. She passed the first section of the exam, 4 months after she started the class. She told me on a Thursday evening at my apartment over dinner she'd cooked, and she was so visibly, genuinely happy about it, that I felt the happiness secondhand in the way you feel another person's good news when you care about them. This was real. Her happiness about the exam result was real. I keep coming back to that, because it matters to the complete picture. The family roof came up in month 7. Her parents' store had a corrugated iron roof that had been patching itself together for years, and was no longer managing the rainy season effectively. The damage to the stock in the last typhoon season had cost them more than the roof repair would cost, she said. She raised it carefully. She told me about it first as something she was thinking about, not as a request, and then a week later mentioned she'd been looking at costs. I asked what the number was. She said about $14,000 for proper repair, plus some structural work that the contractor said was necessary. I said I'd cover it. She looked at me with an expression that I read as genuine, and that may have been genuine, and that I am no longer able to fully evaluate, because I no longer fully trust my ability to read her. Her family came to Davao for a Sunday lunch at a restaurant I'd booked 3 months after the roof. Her parents were warm and her brother was quiet and clever, and seemed to like me in the undemonstrative way of a teenager who's been told to be on his best behavior and is managing it. Her mother cried a little during the meal, which Aiza translated as her saying she was grateful for what I'd done for the family. I was moved by it. I sat at that restaurant table at 67 years old, surrounded by a family who were expressing what felt like genuine warmth, and I felt useful in a way I hadn't felt since I'd last seen a patient. That feeling is something I'm not going to retroactively deny. It was real, and it mattered to me, and I'm not ashamed of needing it. I'm just honest about what it cost. The car was month 10, a second-hand Toyota that was reliable and safe, and that Aiza said she needed to get to the nursing review center more efficiently and to look credible when she started applying for hospital positions after the exam. The amount was $22,000 for a solid, well-maintained vehicle that I verified was priced fairly by asking Marcus to have a friend in Davao take a look at it. The friend confirmed it was a fair price. I transferred the money. I want to tell you what was going through my mind during the car conversation, because I think it's the most important interior moment in the whole story, and I want to render it honestly. When Aiza told me what she needed and what it would cost, there was a fraction of a second, shorter than I can properly describe, but present, definitely present, where something in me that I can only call a sensor registered a note. Not alarm, nothing as clear as alarm, a note. The way a sound in an engine room registers below conscious hearing, and then you realize you heard it only after you've already stopped to listen. I chose not to listen to it. I evaluated the car price externally, confirmed it was fair, and focused on the specific transaction rather than the accumulation it was part of. $22,000 for a reliable car for a young woman working toward a nursing career is not, in isolation, an unreasonable thing. That was how I processed it. In isolation, not as part of a running total. My daughter Jenna called me in month 12, not specifically about Aiza. She called every few weeks and we talked about the usual things. But she asked how things were in Davao, and I told her about Aiza, in the version I told people, the mentoring version, and Jenna was quiet in a specific way that was her mother's quiet, the way Linda had been quiet when she was choosing her words carefully. She said, "Dad, can I ask you something directly?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Is this a romantic relationship?" I said it was complicated. She said, "Okay, I just want to know that you're protecting yourself. Not just emotionally, financially too." I said I was fine. She said, "Okay, Dad, I love you." I said I loved her too. We moved on. I am telling you all of these moments, Victor, Jenna, the fraction of a second before the car, because I want you to understand that I was not a man who received no signals. I received signals. I evaluated each one as insufficient to change course, and then I continued on the same course. That is not the same as being deceived without any awareness. That is a man making choices to ignore his own navigation, because the destination he was heading toward felt better than the one he would have reached if he'd listened. By month 18, the total I'd spent on and through Aiza, review classes, family roof, car, living expenses I'd covered when she had short months, smaller things I hadn't tracked individually, was somewhere north of $90,000. I didn't know the exact number, because I'd stopped counting the smaller amounts somewhere around month 8, when counting them had started to feel like a statement I wasn't willing to make. When I eventually added it up, after the beach, the total came to $150,000 over 22 months. The beach was month 22. We'd taken a weekend trip to a stretch of coast south of the city that Aiza said she'd wanted to show me, a quieter beach than the main tourist strips, and we drove out on a Saturday morning with a cooler and towels, and it was one of those genuinely good days that I don't want to frame as a deception, because I don't think the day itself was a deception. The water was clear, and the sand was the right color, and Aiza was easy company in the way she could be, when she wasn't managing anything, and I was happy in the immediate way of a man who is warm and comfortable, and with someone who knows how to be present. She went for water from the cooler. I've already told you what the phone said. I've already told you about the spreadsheet. I want to tell you now about the 15 seconds after I read the graduation column, because those 15 seconds are where the most significant thing in this story happened. What I felt was not what I expected to feel. I expected rage. I expected that sick, destabilizing shock that comes with discovering a betrayal. I sat there on that beach towel in the Davao heat, and I waited for those feelings, and what arrived instead was something quieter, and in some ways much worse. What arrived was recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. The feeling of something you've known in a vague, distant way becoming suddenly precise and named, the way a shape in fog becomes a specific object when the fog clears. The spreadsheet wasn't new information about the world. It was new information about what I'd already known and had chosen not to know. She was 24 years old. She came from a family whose store barely covered the bills. She was smart, and she was doing the arithmetic that her situation required, and the arithmetic included me, and she had friends who were helping her manage the arithmetic systematically, and none of that was surprising once I was willing to look at it clearly. The surprise was how unsurprised I was. Aiza came back from the cooler. She handed me a water bottle and lay down on her towel and put her sunglasses on and said, "Are you okay? You look different." I said, "I'm fine. I'm hot." She accepted that. She put music in her earphones and closed her eyes, and I sat there with her phone on the towel between us, and the spreadsheet in my recent history, and the Gulf of Davao in front of me. And I looked at all of it, and I thought about Victor saying eyes open, and Jenna asking if I was protecting myself, and the fraction of a second before the car, and I thought about the word I had used, mentoring, and what that word was doing in my mouth every time I said it. I said it to make something true that I also knew wasn't fully true. That's what the word was doing. Mentoring let me be generous and involved and central to a young person's life, without having to acknowledge what I was also doing, which was filling the absence of Linda, and the absence of the practice, and the absence of being needed in a regular, daily way that I had felt more acutely than I'd admitted to anyone, including myself. She was a project to her friends. She was something else to me. She was the thing I called mentoring, because calling it loneliness would have required more honesty than I was prepared for. I didn't confront her on the beach. I'm not going to pretend that was strategic. It wasn't strategic. I was in the middle of processing something that I needed to be alone to fully process, and being on a beach with the subject of the processing was not the right condition for it. I was also, and I want to be honest about this, not entirely sure I wanted to have the conversation that would end the arrangement, because the arrangement, the word I was now using internally, arrangement rather than relationship, had been providing me with something that I hadn't replaced and didn't know how to replace. I said nothing that day. We drove back to Davao. She cooked dinner at my apartment and we watched a Filipino drama on the television, and she fell asleep on the couch, and I sat there next to her in the dark, with the television going, and I looked at her sleeping face, and I thought about the column labeled graduation, and what it said about the gap between what she was doing and what I was telling myself she was doing, and I sat with that for a long time without moving. I called Victor the following morning, Sunday, right on schedule. He asked how things were, and I said I had something to tell him, and I told him. I read him the column headers from memory. I told him the total. I told him about the word mentoring and what I thought it had been doing. Victor was quiet for longer than he usually was. Then he said, "Preston, are you okay?" I said I didn't know yet. He said, "Do you want me to come out there?" I said no. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said I was going to think about it for a few days, and then I was going to have a conversation with her. He said, "Okay, call me after." I gave myself 3 days. During those 3 days, I went through what I knew as honestly as I could. The nursing exam preparation was real. Her ambition for a different kind of life was real. The warmth she showed me was at least partially real, or I could not entirely prove it wasn't. The friendship and the spreadsheet and the graduation column were also real. Both sets of things were real at the same time. I didn't want to make her a simple villain, because that would have required making myself a simple victim, and I was not a simple victim. I was a 68-year-old man who had needed something and had found a 24-year-old who was providing it and billing for the service in a way I'd chosen not to examine. I had the conversation on a Wednesday evening. I made dinner. I cooked, for once, a simple pasta that I'd learned from a recipe in a cookbook my daughter Rachel had sent me as a moving-in gift for the Davao apartment. And we ate, and when we were done, I put the dishes aside and I told her what I'd seen on the beach. She didn't deny it. I'll give her that. She could have denied it. She could have performed confusion, said it was a joke between friends, given me something to argue against. Instead, she put her hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment, and then she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry you found it like that." I said, "I want to understand it." She said, "I think you understand it." I said, "Tell me in your words." She said, "My friends worry about me. They wanted to make sure that I wasn't just drifting, that there was a plan." I said, "A graduation date." She was quiet. I said, "What does graduation mean?" She said, "It means when I'm stable enough to not need." She stopped. I said, "To not need the project." She looked at me directly when I said that. The look on her face was complicated in a way I'm not going to simplify. It was not cold. It was not triumphant. It had something in it that looked, honestly, like the expression of someone who is sorry for a specific thing, and not sorry for the larger framework the specific thing existed within, because the larger framework was survival, and survival doesn't apologize for being survival. She said, "I did care about you. That's also true." I said, "I think it probably is." She said, "Does it matter that it's also true?" I said I didn't know yet. We sat at that table for a while. The television was off. The city was doing its evening sounds outside. She left around 9, without us having resolved anything, because there was nothing to resolve. The arrangement was over. The question of what it had been was going to take longer than an evening to answer, and the answer was probably both things at once. Real care and managed extraction happening in the same person at the same time. And I was going to have to find a way to live with that complexity, rather than collapsing it into something simpler. I told Jenna the following weekend. She handled it the way she handles most things, which is to identify the practical and the emotional separately and address each in turn. The practical, was I financially okay? The answer was yes. The $150,000 was real money, but it didn't touch the base that I needed for retirement. The emotional, how was I actually doing? The answer was that I didn't know, which she received without pushing, which is one of the things I've always valued about Jenna. She said, "Dad, can I say something that might be hard to hear?" I said yes. She said, "I think some part of you knew, not the spreadsheet specifically, but the general shape of it. And I think you made peace with it, because what she was giving you was worth something too. And I don't think that makes you foolish. I think it makes you human. I just wish you'd been able to say it out loud to yourself earlier, because the honesty might have changed the number." I said, "The honesty would have changed the number." She said, "Yeah." I said, "I think I preferred being a project to being alone." There was a silence. Then Jenna said, "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 2 years, Dad." I said, "I know." She said, "I love you. I'm coming out there in March." I said I'd like that. Aiza passed her nursing board exam in full, 6 months after the beach. I know this because we remain in occasional contact of the distant, civil kind that exists between people who have shared something complicated and have decided that animosity requires more energy than acknowledgement. She sent me a message when the results came through, just the news, no elaboration, and I replied with congratulations and meant them. She has since moved to Manila for a hospital position, and I understand from the message she sent 3 months ago, which was the most recent contact, that she is applying for a work visa to a Gulf country, which is the more realistic route for Filipino nurses than Canada, whatever the spreadsheet had projected. The graduation column date passed 4 months ago. She graduated from the project on schedule, more or less. I don't know whether to find that impressive, or sad, or simply accurate, so I've settled on accurate, which feels like the right word for a situation that was always more about arithmetic than anything else. I'm still in Davao. That surprises people when I tell them, including Victor, who expected me to come home. The honest reason I'm still here is that Davao is genuinely where I want to be, and I've separated the city from the arrangement in a way that took some work but turned out to be possible. The bay in the mornings is still the bay. The food is still what it is. The life at the pace I've built here is still better for my specific body and specific temperament than Sacramento would be, and going home would feel like a defeat that I don't believe I've suffered. What I've done differently since the beach is this. I'm in a different cafe, not the one where Aiza worked. A different one 2 streets over that opened recently and makes a better espresso. I have a regular table and a regular order, and the young woman who works the morning shift knows both and has them ready when she sees me coming, and that's all it is, and I've accepted that that's all it needs to be. I've been seeing a therapist, an American woman who works online with expat clients, based in Manila, recommended by a professional network that Marcus pointed me toward. We've had 7 sessions, and the central theme of those sessions is the thing Jenna named on the phone, the preference for being a project over being alone, and what that preference reveals about what I've been doing with loneliness since Linda left and the practice sold. The therapist doesn't tell me the preference is wrong. She asks me to look at what it's been costing me, which is different and more useful. The cost is $150,000, and the larger figure is the 2 years I spent in a situation I half understood and chose not to fully understand, because the half I understood felt better than nothing. I've called Jenna about something other than Aiza every week since January, which is a habit we hadn't had before, and which I find I look forward to in the way I didn't know I would. She's coming in March, as she said she would, and I'm going to take her to the coast south of the city, the beach I went to with Aiza, and we're going to sit on towels in the Davao sun, and look at the Gulf, and she's going to tell me about her kids and her work, and I'm going to listen, and that's going to be enough. Not a project, not arithmetic, just my daughter and the water, and the morning going the way mornings do when you're actually present in them. I am 68 years old, and I have 38 years of work behind me, and a house in Curtis Park appreciating gently, and a pension, and 2 daughters who are doing fine, and a life in a place I genuinely like, and enough money to live it well. That was always enough. The thing I couldn't find in it was the feeling of being needed by a specific person in a daily way, and I searched for that feeling in a place and a person, and a framework that couldn't have given it to me honestly even if it had wanted to. The spreadsheet column was labeled graduation. What graduated, I think, was my ability to pretend I didn't know what was happening while it was happening. What remains, on the other side of it, is a man who is trying to sit with being alone, without immediately filling the alone, with something that will cost him more than it's worth. Some mornings, I manage it better than others. But I'm at the right table, in the right city, drinking coffee that's better than it was. That's enough to start with. That's what I've got.